Hello and welcome to Strategic Intelligence Instant Insights. At Global Data Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Romilly, and today I'll be talking to David Bicknell, Principal Analyst, and David George, Director of Services, both of whom recently jetted to Barcelona for this year's Mobile World Congress Conference. They've kindly agreed to talk to us a bit about their experience there and share a couple of insights from the event. So, David George, if you could start us off just by giving us an overview of what exactly the MWC conference is, for those who don't know.
Sure. So, Mobile World Congress has been going for many years, actually, and the sort of full title Mobile World it probably gives a clue that it really started off as a mobile technology-focused conference, looking at handsets, looking at telecom equipment. I think back in the day it was actually based in Cannes. The operators like people like Vodafone and Orange used to have glamorous things like yachts moored off the coast and stuff to entertain clients on. It's since somewhat moved beyond its mobile roots, so it's still at heart a mobile conference, but it's also much more a broader technology conference. It's now in Barcelona, and it's one of the biggest tech conferences in Europe. I think this year the attendances were back over 100,000. I think pre-COVID it peaked at around 110. I think I saw that about 106,000 people were there this year. So it's a really interesting conference. Lots of consumer devices, lots of enterprise companies there, lots of software companies, cloud, AI, basically all the technologies that you can think of that are kind of current, you'll see represented in some shape or form in Barcelona.
Thanks for that. I think that's a really good summary for those who aren't already in the know. So I'm going to come over to you, David Bicknell. I know you've got a keen interest in cybersecurity. Can you tell me what was memorable about cybersecurity at MWC?
Well, I think the main theme across the whole event was AI, and so there were a number of different companies that were looking at cybersecurity from an AI sort of perspective. I mean, for example, there were various different sort of numbers that were quoted. North America experienced 1,740% increase in deepfakes, and number of deepfake videos increased by 550% between 2019 and 2023. The average time for creating a deepfake photo or video is approximately 27 seconds. You can imagine that all of these things that went into my brain dealing about cybersecurity. But it was just interesting just seeing that focus that was generally around AI at the conference being translated into this cybersecurity angle. The other thing that came out of one of the conferences we had was the idea that people are now going back to work rather than working 2 or 3 days a week. And one of the chief information security officers that we spoke to said, that sort of trend was likely to have an impact in how they looked at cybersecurity. It's been static, and they've known that people will be working 3 days a week for some time, but they're now having to sort of factor that sort of change in. So just picking those bits of sort of nuggets of cybersecurity around at the event was really useful for me as an analyst.
Sounds really interesting. I mean, that increase in deepfakes is quite alarming.
Oh, they're huge numbers, yeah.
And how about digital twins? I know you're interested in those as well.
I seem to have these sort of pockets that I look at. I went onto one stand from a company that was very deep into sort of digital twins, and I was able to use a headset and see how that organisation was using digital twins within an urban context. And so from a smart cities point of view, understanding the ways that they will be using those sort of digital twins sort of technology in that sort of environment. So it was just interesting sort of wearing that sort of headset, and also talking to another digital twins organisation who was talking about the various different sort of complex ways that they're looking at digital twins. For example, looking at the thermal impact within the semiconductor industry and using digital twins to sort of look at that, and also from a sort of telecoms point of view in one of these sort of US cities, just seeing what the level of service was from a user perspective and using digital twins to model that. So it was just really interesting seeing those sort of digital twins in action demonstrated at the event.
Thanks, David. It's always good to hear your pockets of knowledge, as you say. David George, do you think you could please add on to that? What kind of interesting things did you see at the conference?
Yeah, so there were lots of interesting things there. I think to answer that, I'll give a bit of context also what I saw that was interesting the year before. So one thing that I spoke about last year was that there was a pin by a company called Humane. It was a device that basically you wore on your lapel. It's always there's always a big debate, particularly in mobile and smartphones. Sort of what's the smartphone killer? What comes after the smartphone? And this was a device that had a camera, so it could film or take images, but it could also project things onto your hand, and you could use hand gestures to control it and go through a menu of options. And obviously it had a mobile connection. It was founded by some of the interesting tech guys who'd come out from Apple, so it had quite interesting pedigree. But in reality, I don't think the tech was quite ready. I don't think the sort of AI or underlying software was ready, and it just didn't work very well. And actually, it really bombed. It was commercially launched. It didn't sell very much, and actually it was closed down. And I think late last year, the assets were sold off to HP. So as I say, that's kind of a big intro to the fact that there were still lots of headsets and smart glasses in evidence, as you might expect. Dave and I both sat through a short talk from Meta where they talked about their Ray-Ban glasses and the sort of fusion, as they put it, of the digital and physical world. Some of us may balk at that idea that, how do you switch off? But it's quite an interesting vision. And in that vein, one thing that actually caught my eye was a smaller company called Wearable Devices, and they have a smart band which is called Mudra, and this is billed rather grandly as a neural interface. And so what that does is measure neural patterns, or basically your kind of nerve signals, and then that allows you with hand gestures to control either Apple or Android devices. So if you have Apple TV, you could sort of navigate around, select programs, etc. And this is already a commercial product. It's sold, I think, on the App Store, the Apple Store in the US, but could interestingly have a range of applications beyond sort of consumer or enterprise software in terms of people with health or injuries or disabilities. Meta, I believe, is already working on a similar neural interface for their Orion or augmented reality glasses. So this becomes quite an interesting and practical way of controlling devices, particularly when we think of the evolution of augmented or mixed or virtual reality. A lot of those have a camera to track your hand movement, so that's one option. But obviously, if you can wear a band, then you're reducing the amount of hardware, and that becomes a little easier. I don't think we're at the age yet of a true smartphone killer, and maybe, frankly, we never will. But I think as we see things like AI and neural interfaces come together, then perhaps we end up ultimately with a device that becomes much more compelling.
It sounds all very futuristic, that controlling things with your hand. I feel like I wouldn't have imagined that we could already be experimenting with that kind of thing today.
It was interesting, yeah.
Was there anything that was missing from the conference that you might have expected to see? Just because you mentioned that you've been there for quite a few years now. How about this year?
Yes, I couldn't remember. This is my 8th or 9th conference or something. But so one thing that wasn't there, and I'm not sure we necessarily thought it would be, but it was good in a way not to see it, was 6G. Which, so if for those of you, many of you are familiar, we're currently sort of in the 5G era. 6G is the next mobile standard. That would, in theory, come around 2030. I think obviously probably it's going to be a little bit later than that. I think there's no great enthusiasm just now, particularly from operators. I did see a couple of banners around the event that referenced it. I heard one person talk about 6G standards, but generally it just was not top of mind or front of any of the discussions certainly that we were involved in. I think in the short term there's still working on standards. I think in fact there's the standards body 3GPP. I think are meeting in San Francisco next week. There's always a lot of focus on spectrum. There's always a bit of a land grab of can we get new spectrum for a mobile standard. But I think from the operator community, the telecom operators, they're really still focused on trying to make some money out of 5G. There's a bit of investment fatigue, and they're still trying to improve sort of 5G networks and services and work out other ways to monetize that, both on the consumer and the enterprise front, and perhaps talking as well actually satellite. Satellite, I know we're talking about things that weren't there, but actually satellite was a big topic, lots of satellite operators. So I think all of that really drowned out any talk of 6G at this stage.
Thanks, David. I think that's almost all we've got time for today. So I'm wondering if we could just end with both of you telling us what your key takeaways were from the entire event. So maybe David Bicknell, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I went about 4 years ago, which was a year after COVID, and there were about 50,000 people there. I spent quite a bit of time in the sort of conferences where we were talking about things like EdTech there. That was bearable sort of for 50,000, 106,000 this time around. You really knew it. There was a lot of energy. Mobile World Congress is such a big event each year, and obviously there was a big sort of focus around AI. So it was really good to go, and just to sort of try out those bits of sort of technology, whether it's digital twins, whether it's sort of smart glasses, and just sort of feel like you're at that sort of cutting edge from a tech point of view. I think that's the thing that I would take away most of all.
Mm. How about you, David George? Any final words?
Yeah, so I suppose a key takeaway, we actually haven't really mentioned the word too much, is AI. And I think the biggest thing that we heard everywhere was AI was the buzzword, particularly agentic AI. I know, and agentic AI has actually been around for a little while, but it's been kind of super powered now by the rise of generative AI. So it was everywhere. You know, the telcos, I thought this was sort of quite interesting, if not amusing. So it was sort of rebranding themselves as techcos rather than telcos because they're so enthused and using AI everywhere. But the big question that I think, and my big takeaway, was actually still one about sort of return on investment. What is all of these applications of AI actually getting you? They're all very credible. A number of them are happening, but a lot of our clients outside of this event are saying, where's the return on investment? What are you getting from that? We did have one, David and I both went with Google Cloud, and they flagged a report that they'd actually published last year based on a survey of a lot of their clients who claimed that generative AI was already delivering not only material efficiency savings, but also enhancing revenue growth, which is a very bullish statement, but I would counter that it was somewhat at odds with what we heard on the ground from the companies that we spoke to and the end users that we spoke to at the event. So I think that's basically a question that's going to run for some time yet.
Thanks, David. And thanks very much to both of you. It's been really interesting hearing about your experience and all of the highlights from the conference. I'm sure you're excited to go next year as well. So thank you for those instant insights. Thanks for listening. And from us at Strategic Intelligence, see you next time.